your account. So like your name, your home address, you can put in your payment details, etc. And then step two, so let's say if you are someone that's in a wheelchair, in a lot of markets, you're actually allowed or able to enable what's called access mode. And so this will just alert the Lyft app that you're someone in a wheelchair, you need wheelchair access, so that when you're trying to look for a ride, it will actually pair you with a driver that's in a wheelchair accessible vehicle. This type of access mode is not yet available in Metro Vancouver, since we still are very new here, but it's definitely something we have in a lot of other markets across North America, and something we're really thinking about, how do we bring this here in a way that's inclusive and in a way that really fits with this local community's needs. Once you kind of put in like your profile, what you need from the app, who you are, etc., and you start, wanting to actually use it, the next step would be within the app, you put in, the destination that you're in and where you want to get a ride to. And then you get to kind of figure out, all these different types of access modes will pop up. So there's wheelchair mode in a lot of jurisdictions, again, not yet here, but it does exist in jurisdictions like California and Toronto, and it's something we want to bring here as well. And in some jurisdictions, we also have green mode, where you can specifically request an electric vehicle. And then back in the time before COVID, you could even carpool and request what's called a shared ride. And then when you tap request access, the app will essentially confirm your pickup location and who your driver will be, the route that you will go on, and how long that ride will actually take. So just again, to reiterate, when you're requesting a ride, you're essentially entering the destination you want to go to. You're going to see all the nearby cars that are around you, and then you're ultimately going to be paired up with a driver that suits your need personally, but also where you want to go to. And one of the great things with the Lyft app is the fare will be displayed up front. So even before you confirm that you want to take that ride, you will know how much it costs, and that cost will not change during the duration of that ride, unless something really crazy happens, like there's a big accident, or there's something where the driver has to make a really big kind of detour. As I said, you're going to be matched with a driver. And one of the great things as well is you'll know who your driver is before, again, you decide to accept the ride. So they'll show you the driver name and the headshot, the car make, the model, the license plate, and what your pickup ETA will be. So you'll know, if it will take 2 minutes for the driver to come and get you, or 5 minutes, and you will continue getting real-time alerts in terms of how long they're actually going to take to get you, and when you should start preparing to actually go outside to meet your driver. And then when you're finishing a ride, essentially when you're creating the app, as I mentioned, you'll put in your pre-selected credit or debit card within the app. And so every time you finish a ride, it'll be that pre-selected credit or debit card that will be charged. And then there's also in-app tipping, which is really great and really helps further boost driver earnings. And Lyft was actually the first rideshare platform that had this type of in-app tipping service. One of the other really great things about Lyft is that you can rate your ride. And so it's really about having accountability and transparency between the rider and the driver. So if you get into a car with a driver that is not treating you well, that's discriminating you for any type of reason, that is driving in not a safe way, right away you can let our trust and safety team know that, and you can give a lower rating, and then you can also put in feedback. And then we know right away what the problem was, and we can deal with that right away. And both riders and drivers can report incidents to our dedicated trust and safety team, as I said, and we do have a 24/7 critical response line. So for example, one of the things that's really important at Lyft is that all service dogs are allowed all the time. And so if you ever get into a Lyft vehicle where the driver does not allow you in the vehicle because you have a service dog, this is something that you should right away report, and we will right away rectify that. We also have a lot of different in-app safety features. Obviously, safety is really important for us. We wouldn't be a successful business if we didn't make safety a top priority. And so there's a few different types of features that we have within the app. So obviously your contact details are protected. We do have GPS tracking. So once you accept a ride with a driver, your ride is being tracked. And if we notice that there's any kind of deviation away from the pre-approved route, the trust and safety team will contact you and make sure that everything's okay. There's also location sharing with your close contacts. So sometimes when I get into a Lyft ride and it's really late at night, I'll share my location with my husband, and also I'll share my route with my husband, so he'll know exactly where I am. And when I get home safely, he'll also be notified. And as I mentioned, there's also real-time feedback to really keep that accountability and transparency going between the rider and the driver. Kind of already mentioned this about sharing your route, so that's a really great thing to do to make yourself feel safe when you're in a Lyft vehicle. And then one of the really important things I wanted to go through is accessible features. So obviously, there's a lot of things within the Lyft platform right now in BC that are available, even though we don't have, the access mode and the wheelchair accessible vehicle mode in place yet. And one of the really cool things about this is we actually have an accessibility specialist at our headquarters that is from the blind community. And he's really the person that is constantly, every single week, testing the app, making sure that the app is inclusive and accessible, and will give us and the engineering team real-time feedback in terms of what has to be changed. And so that's kind of the beauty about this application. Since it is a tech application, it's never static. We can continuously improve it and innovate on it. And so that's one of the big roles that this accessibility specialist plays. But we have a lot of different features. So we have voiceover controls. So if you are someone who is, vision impaired, you can put this on so that the app will actually tell you, where your driver is when you should be going out, rather than you having to read the app. We also have a hard of hearing feature and an AMP device. And, if you're someone that's getting into a Lyft vehicle with a driver who is hard of hearing, you'll receive a text message that this is the case, just so you maybe speak up a little bit more and be respectful. And as I mentioned, we have a very clear service animal policy. It's something that's very, very ingrained in our culture. And all drivers are very much educated on that policy. And then we do have driver education videos as well that really remind our community about the commitment to inclusion that we do have on our app. And we do a lot of different types of partnerships as well. I've put here some American examples just because we're so entrenched in the US market and we're still very new in Canada, but we're really, really excited to replicate these types of partnerships here in Canada. And I mean, it's such a great start with the BC Disability Foundation, and it's something that we definitely want to continue doing so that we have a number of really healthy partnerships here locally, like we do in the United States. And then lastly, I just thought it would be interesting to go through some of these statistics. Every year, Lyft does what's called an economic impact report. And we're actually going to publish our next one in February that will include British Columbia data, which is really exciting. But this data was pulled from our last one, and it was done before we actually started operating in BC. But I thought this was just interesting to kind of end the presentation with. So in Toronto, 70% of riders with a disability state that Lyft has increased their independence, and this goes up to 85% in Ottawa. So it's really, really positive looking data, and it's something that we're really hoping to see as well for out of Vancouver. Probably in the next few months, we'll get the data, and I'm really happy to share that with whoever is interested. And yeah, that's it for my presentation. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks very much, Sophia. That's really great. So what I'm going to do now, we're doing very well for time-wise, by the way, but I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking to you about some findings from a survey. So maybe I'll pull up my title slide, and then I'll talk about it as I do that. It's a little laggy, it seems. There we go. Oh. Could start here maybe, but I'll start here. So the Disability Foundation sent out a survey and it closed, I think, at the end of last week. So over 120 people participated in the survey. And so thank you all for doing that. And there's lots of really rich data that's come out of that. And I'm just going to give you a bit of a bird's eye view of some of the findings from that survey. So the survey was filled out primarily by people with visible disabilities, although about 20% had what they would call invisible disabilities. And then there was a smattering of other people who participated. The dreaded other category, and prefer not to say, but also some healthcare professionals and some primary care aides as well. So one of the questions I just want to draw your attention to is, do you feel as though you have equal access to public and private transportation? And so a large majority of the participants actually said they didn't feel that they had that kind of access. So I think that's an important consideration for our panelists as we move through the rest of the session. In terms of modes of transportation pre-COVID, you can see that the most common modes were private vehicle, public transportation, and then walking and wheeling was another big one. And then you'll see, obviously, ride sharing was very small because it just launched last Christmas, and it's with COVID, I think there's been some issues. So in terms of accessibility, just to interpret these charts, so very poor is orange, and very good is dark blue. And so actually, well, I shouldn't say dark blue. It's a blue, dark blue. I don't know, middle dark blue is very good. Sorry. So you can see, and if it sort of shifted above that 0, then that would sort of indicate it's sort of more positive in terms of accessibility. So most people were saying things like private vehicles were accessible. They thought cycling was accessible. Oh, actually, no, we shouldn't say that. Most people didn't cycle. That's why it's the dark blue. Yeah, that's the dark blue. And then once again, most people weren't doing rideshare. So people didn't know too much about that. But interestingly, taxis seemed like an issue with accessibility. And there were issues identified with public transportation as well. And also even with wheeling and walking, which probably reflect issues with the built environment. So this is about what's going to happen in the future once we're through COVID. That's our big hope with the vaccines coming online. And talking to people about what their intentions were with transportation moving forward. Although I shouldn't say this wasn't about the end of COVID, this was more focused on as the economy reopens. So maybe I should walk that back a bit. So most people were doing more use of private vehicles, more walking and wheeling. And then it was sort of split in terms of the bus and SkyTrain. Looks like sort of it's a wash that people would be doing more or less, but it's all going to even out. It does look like people were thinking about doing less ride sharing, however, less taxi, and less handy dart as well. In terms of the ride share, most people were, I shouldn't say most, but almost half of people said they weren't familiar with the ride share. And so hopefully Sophia's presentation has been helpful for you. And as you saw in the previous slides, very few people have actually have used Lyft or another rideshare platform. And then Sophia was telling us about some of the accessibility features. And I think that presentation is useful in that when we looked at the data, a large majority of people weren't aware of the accessibility features that were built into the app. So I thought that was helpful. Unfortunately, we weren't able to secure anyone from the taxi industry to come today because there are some questions that have come up in that regard. It's about a third of the respondents indicated that they've been refused taxi service because of a disability. And a majority of people didn't trust that a taxi driver wouldn't give them the same priority as a person without a disability. And then almost 3/4 of people thought that there weren't enough accessible vehicles in the fleet. And just in terms of the trust that people have, because I think that's a fundamental issue here when we're talking about transportation. Once again, you can see that middle line, if everything's half and half, it's sort of neutral. So it's sort of a neutral response in terms of whether people will find reasonable timetables that allow them to get to their destinations on time. So some people actually felt that, but a lot of people didn't. So obviously we'd love to see that bar moved up. There was also concerns about accessibility of bus stops and whether they were within a reasonable distance. And the one that is probably that elicits a lot of distrust was just around being informed in a timely manner when their accessibility features are out of service. So for example, elevators at SkyTrain stations, which obviously makes a big difference on your route planning if you use a wheelchair. And so then I think this is the final question from my summary here, is just around the public transit systems in terms of accessibility. And once again, the NA, so just sort of ignore for now, but generally sort of people were, the bus was sort of in the middle there. SkyTrain was more accessible. C-Bus was in the middle. HandyDart was also in the middle. And West Coast Express was sort of in the middle as well. So, you know, obviously there's some room for improvement from the participants, the people respondents to this survey. So I'm going to stop sharing. And so what we're going to do now is just spend a few minutes asking you guys some questions. So basically, we're hoping that, once again, this is a bit of a dialogue. So we thought we'd ask you some questions because we realized that the people who completed the survey are not necessarily the same people who are here attending the session. So we'll get Odin to share the first question. So in terms of the brief synopsis I gave of the survey findings, I was just hoping that people could indicate using those 7 options how they find the findings reflect their experiences. It turns out that the hosts and panelists cannot vote. So I think as we do that, I guess we'll just give people a minute or two to complete the survey. Oh. Okay, well, I think that's probably enough time. So Odin, are you able to share the responses to that question? Great, okay. So the majority was in the moderately reflect, and then there was a smattering above and below that. So yeah, and then there was a few people who didn't reflect their experiences at all. So I don't know, I guess we're not preaching to the exact same people who filled out this survey. So I guess the panelists should just keep that in mind when they're doing their responding to some of the questions and answering questions too. Thank you. So Odin, can you share the next question then? So the next question is, what is the most important issue that needs to be addressed to enable you to get around? And we'd like you to pick just one. Okay, Odin, if we can get you to share the results to that question, that would be great. Okay, so this is great. Thanks so much for answering that question. So there's some people who have concerns about capacity. Majority of people, the big thing is around equal access to public and private transportation. Cost and wait time seem like less of an important issue. but there's also definitely issues with the built environment. And then some more issues around frequency of service, and then basically about educating the operators about accessibility policies. Great, thanks so much for that. So if we can settle the next question, that would be great. So what transportation option do you most frequently rely on? Okay. Odin, can you show us the poll for that? Great. So not this, once again, reflects the survey findings, but it seems the majority of people are using private vehicles, although there definitely a third of people here are using public transit. And then about a tenth are using the walking and wheeling. So it's that bimodal split. That's what my PhD student would call that. Great. And I think this is our last question. So the last question, if you can share that, Odin, is what would be the most important thing that would make ride sharing more appealing to you? And the options are affordability, vehicles that accommodate all types of mobility devices, including power chairs, educated, trained drivers, strong policy to support those with a disability, reasonable wait times, and availability, not having to book a day or more in advance. Okay, Odin, if you want to share the findings, that would be great. Okay, so it looks like the big thing is around accessibility, or the accommodation of mobility devices. And obviously, Sophia did indicate that that's a direction that Lyft is moving towards. But yeah, if you can't get your mobility device in the rideshare vehicle, it's not very useful for you, obviously. So thank you for that. And obviously, there's still other issues just around towards affordability, availability, and then still questions about education of the drivers as well. So thank you. Great. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just get the panel to answer a few prepared questions. And after that, we'll throw it open to the rest of the people in attendance here. So we'll go basically around and maybe we'll start. Well, I'll tell you the question and I'll tell who goes next. And we'll tweak the question a teeny little bit for Terry, because the questions are mostly targeted towards people who are providing services. So my first question is, and we'll give people about 2 minutes to answer each of the questions. So the first question is around what are the current things that are working and things that need improvement in your transportation service for people with disabilities? And for Terry, we can just let him talk about generally for people with disabilities, not his service. And so maybe we'll start with Sam. No, you don't do those. You don't have a service though, Sam, but maybe you could talk about the things you think are.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak in a general way.
Thank you.
So it's always been one of the things as I've spent time through my career, first with my work at Disability Alliance BC in Vancouver, and now in my capacity working with the province of BC, is that one of the things that makes disability a really interesting area is that as a community, we, and I say we as a legally blind person myself, are such a diverse group of individuals. And really there's almost no characteristic beyond diversity that better defines the disability community. So whether we think about ensuring equitable access for people with sensory impairments, such as myself, or people who have mobility-related impairments, people who have mental health or intellectual disability. What's always been really clear to me, and I think that this is also true within the transportation space, is that we need to be thinking really broadly and inclusively about the differing experiences of people in the community, and to understand that what works in terms of equitable transport for one of us may not necessarily be the right solution for the next person. And it really requires that we engage robustly across the full variety of the disability community as we're developing policies, as we're developing programs, and as we're thinking about, really what does it mean to ensure that people with disabilities across the incredible spectrum of this community enjoy that equal access. And I hope that starts us off in an okay way to have the conversation. I know there's much more to be said on that question.
Chris, I was muted, sorry. So the next, just to remind, I'll let you ask Chris, and just to remind you, the question is around the things that are working and things that aren't working with your service.
Thank you, Ben. In Lower Mainland, we are pretty lucky. In my opinion, we do have a public transit service that is quite accessible. Now, with that said, it's not fully accessible to everyone. And I think Sam hit the point right in the nail right in the head, because there are just such a wide range of disability in the community. And so for example, I was having a conversation with autism support, autism service provider. They were asking me about the pitch, about the compass gates. Can we turn them off? Because it was becoming an issue for customer with sensory issues. But part of the reason why there was that pitch was to notify customers with sight loss, that they would be able to know that the gate is open and that their card is tapped. So there's always a balance. But I think what is working also in Lower Mainland is we have a lot of groups and a lot of partners, like today, many partners are showing up for the panel and having this discussion, and everybody is willing to work together. So I think that we got that going for us. And a lot of good ideas are coming from the community regarding the public transit system that we can implement.
Thanks very much. So maybe we'll go to John Stipovi next.
Sure. So I think I can speak maybe from a industry as a whole perspective, especially on the operator side. I think we're seeing a number of advancements in a number of areas. So we're seeing vehicle types evolving and getting better. So many cases, minivans are used for accessible services, but we're seeing slightly larger format vehicles that aren't large and industrious and things like that offer a lot more comfort and maneuverability, especially with those in wheelchairs and things like that. So good innovation, evolution there. I think we're also seeing technology evolve, and not necessarily, I think when we speak about technology, we think about the front end user side, and many people don't have access to smartphones and those kinds of things. But beyond that, we're seeing the advancement of technology on the back end of things. So for operators like ourselves, better routing, better visibility into where vehicles are, timing of vehicles and things like that actually we think is generally enhancing accessible services right across the board. So I think just general industry innovations is probably one of the better things that's happening in the industry for sure.
Thanks very much, Sean. Sophia Cote.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, in terms of what we're doing well, you know, I think we've worked really hard to allow people in the communities in which we operate to get around conveniently and affordably. And we have expanded transportation access for a wide range of people with different needs, including seniors, those who are part of the low vision community, those who are hard of hearing, and those who use a foldable wheelchair or a walker. And as I mentioned, like we're seeing in Toronto and Ottawa, where we've been operating for a few years, that, you know, 70% in Toronto and 85% people in Ontario with disabilities do feel like Lyft has given them more independence. But in all honesty, as Sam said, you know, this community has a wide range of different needs, and we're not meeting them all. And one of the biggest ones that we're not meeting is wheelchair accessibility. And that's something that we know as a business that we need to improve on. You know, our business model is made up of, you know, drivers who are really using their own vehicles. And most people don't have a wheelchair accessible vehicle that is retrofitted for, you know, every type of wheelchair that is out there. And so I think that's something that we really as a business need to be better at. And we need to really understand within the communities that we operate, how can we be better and how can we offer a service that is accessible to people with all types of disabilities. And so that's why we're here today, just to really listen and understand, you know, how can we take some of the great things that we've done in markets like California and Toronto and Chicago and Boston and Brooklyn, and take that and also the you know, the feedback that you're giving today and create a made in BC approach that can really work well. So yeah, so that's why I'm excited to be here today.
Thanks so much, Sophia. So Terry, maybe you can reflect on what other people have been saying, and just tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, some bouquets and maybe some areas for improvement. I was muted too. You're muted, Terry.
That's twice. What I was saying was that I think our regular transit is working well, thanks to we solved the problem of fare gates. We were shut out there for a while, but fare gates were fixed, thanks to Mr. Desmond. I like the culture that he's left with the company. And one thing that is not working well for people is getting taxis to show up. And so in preparation for this, I was asking people who use taxis, accessible taxis, that is, and with the ride-hailing companies on board, they seem to be getting a lot more of the accessible taxis logging on to, in BC's case, it's Uber, the Uber platform. So that's a good thing that you call Uber and you'll get an accessible taxi. But you should be able to call the taxi company and get an accessible taxi. So I think the spreading around of the business has made the accessible taxi drivers fleet more responsive. But that's short term. You know, for my needs, it seemed to have worked, ride hailing, but I'm worried about further down the line. So that would be one thing that I'm worried about, is who is going to come up with the next generation of accessible vehicles, whether it's a taxi company or a blend of the ride hailing. Yeah, that hasn't been figured out yet. And I'm not sure if any of the markets have figured it out yet. So that concerns me going forward.
That's a great segue, Terry, because that leads into the next question that I was hoping to ask the panelists. And I think we'll go around in the same order just to make it easier for people so they are less confused. Maybe I'm just reading into things for me. So the next question was just really around what are some of the ways that you or your organization is working on those areas that need improvement. And for Terry, he could talk to us just about the stuff he's doing. That would be lovely to hear. So Sam, would you be able to comment on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I think I'm perhaps the person on the panel who's least expert on the specifics of transportation and accessibility, which maybe makes it helpful for me to go first. And the first thing that I wanted to say, not to speak to that question, but to the last question, is I really wanted to thank my fellow panelists for speaking candidly about where the challenges are in this space. And I think it's so important that we have these opportunities to come together with people with disabilities and with people in industry, and to really be frank and understand that there's going to be difficulties with respect to access in many different kinds of circumstances. But as long as we're all at the table and trying to figure out how to make things better, I'm quite encouraged. So as you've noted, Ben, I don't work for a transit operator myself, so I can't necessarily speak from that perspective. But maybe what I can say, as many of you know, and I suspect that some of you will have participated in this process, in 2019, we supported the government of British Columbia to initiate a public conversation about developing accessibility legislation for British Columbia. And we had a really robust dialogue in many communities across BC from September to November of 2019. And certainly transportation was a consistent theme. When we spoke with people about, what are the challenges that you're experiencing in your community, and where do you hope that a scheme for accessibility will support improvements. And I'm happy to let everybody know that that work has continued to progress, notwithstanding the significant impacts that all of us are experiencing as a result of the measures due to COVID-19. And while the work of the accessibility legislation won't exclusively be about the ways that people with disabilities access transport, I think it will be a really important branch of the implementation of accessibility legislation. And one of the things that I hope this legislation will do is help to align BC better with work around accessibility in other provinces and at the national level, and also to create space to, in an organized way, have conversations and work to developing clearer policy and procedure for accessibility in a whole range of different kinds of spaces, transportation included. And I think that's maybe the most helpful contribution that I can make to this part of the to this question. So I'll pass it back to you, Ben.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sam. That's great. Yeah, and it's really been, I've been part of those consultations around the accessibility legislation. So yeah, thanks for bringing those up. It's great to hear. So I think we had Chris next, last time in the order that we had before. So this is what the thing you're, how you're trying to address areas that need improvement.
So I think, as I kind of mentioned earlier, and that was one of the good things that we are doing in Lower Mainland, is we continue the conversation. We will continue to speak to different stakeholders in the community to hear about the needs and how we can improve the different services that we have, especially here in Lower Mainland. Now, one of the things that, and I did see a comment that there's nobody with a disability on the board of TransLink. That might be true, well, at least not visible disability. But what TransLink does have is we actually have the user advisory committee, which the members are representative from the disability community, and they actually meet I believe once a month, or I actually go to those meetings myself, and we actually do forward a lot of our big projects, like plans and things like that, and ask for feedback from the community. And some of the participants might be HandyDart user, and some of you might have heard that the HandyDart, there's also a user advisory committee now. So we continue to reach out to the stakeholders in the community, ask them how we can improve these services. And as I said, we don't have a silver bullet on any of being able to solve all of it. But as technology grows and as education and as awareness grows, I think we can improve our services slowly but gradually.
Thanks very much, Chris. So John, if you could take on that question, that'd be great.
Yeah, from our perspective, I think there's two pieces when we think about this. Certainly, we think about this from a transit perspective. So we do operate a number of transit contracts, which include accessible services and conventional transit, but we also operate intercity services. And for both, we take this approach really from a high level customer service perspective. So thinking about customer service first and foremost. So whether it's locations that were located for our intercity services, let's say, how accessible are they and how do they connect with other modes of transit and things like that. Again, to Chris's point, technology is evolving, and we take a look at that from a number of different aspects to, again, look at how we can improve that customer service and customer experience in general. And then I think lastly, again, just the evolution and the advancement in vehicles and things like that, I think makes a significant difference in being able to deliver a higher service quality. So that's how we approach it.
Thanks so much, John. Sophia.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, as I mentioned, what we take really seriously is working with local community partners, such as local disability rights organizations, to inform how we provide effective wave service in the markets in which we operate. As I mentioned, we acknowledge that there's still so much work to do to expand the benefits of ride sharing to users of fixed frame wheelchairs. And so it's through partners like the BC Disability Foundation and, really talking to people that have a disability and are really every day living this reality to really understand like what we can do to increase access. And I think this is one of the things that we're really trying to do in different markets. I also do want to mention that, we do offer wave in other markets. So, in some markets, we connect with third-party providers who provide a driver and a wave vehicle. Some partners include national companies such as First Transit and Pacific Western Transportation, who's on this call. We partner with them in Toronto to offer wave. In other places, we already pay into an accessibility fee. So we did that in California, and we're doing that here in BC. And in California, what we were able to do was actually access the fund that we were already paying into to reinvest back into our platform so that we could provide these types of wave vehicles on the platform. And so that's something that we want to understand here as well. We're paying every ride in a Lyft that's done here in BC, we're paying 30 cents. That's going into this fund, this provincial fund. And so similar to what we've done in California, we would love to understand how can we use that fund and do something that really works here using the input from all of these different community organizations and individuals that are really experiencing this every day.
Thanks so much, Sophia. Just as a point of clarification, maybe it's just my own ignorance. Can you tell us a little more about what WAVE is?
Sorry, wheelchair accessible vehicles.
Okay, thank you so much. That's my own ignorance. damn it, I unmuted myself to talk, or vice versa. Terry, can you give us a little sense of what you've been doing in this area, or any thoughts about what the other panelists have been saying?
Well, yeah, as I say, I worked on the Fairgates problem for some time, but in answer to Sophia, I'm sure there's people with disabilities from several organizations that would be happy to help. You know, if you needed advice from stakeholders, yeah, we're very inclusive group. So, and I can't remember the question, Ben. Sorry.
Oh, so the question, well, so the rest of people, I was asking people what, how they're working to address areas that need improvement. But I thought for you, you might just tell us a little bit about some of the work you're doing to promote transportation among people with disabilities.
Well, that we did have I'm also on the board of Spinal Cord Injury BC, and we partnered with Uber when the ride hailing first came out. So that was our first experience with, you know, collaborating with the group. They haven't gotten back to us since, so it'd be interesting to see have a 2-year after meeting with them. But yeah, aside from surveys, I haven't been doing a lot of work on that front.
Okay, thanks very much, Terry. That's great. And so we just have one last question for the panelists from me, and then we're going to throw it open to the floor. And if people want to start thinking about the questions they want to ask, so we'll get people to put questions in the chat, and they'll get asked for like 20 minutes or maybe 25 minutes. And then people will have the opportunity to raise hands, and they can ask questions audibly. So we're hoping that'll be a little more inclusive if people can't really use the chat to do that kind of questioning. Great. So last question. So we'll go back to Sam. And the question is really just around, what do you think is the biggest challenge that is really making it hard to improve things in this area?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and one that to a certain extent I spoke to in earlier remarks. I guess to build on what I think many of us have said, and to reiterate in some ways, I think that it's really, so I had highlighted initially that the diversity of the disability community was something that we really need to pay attention to and think about carefully in the way that we roll out accessible transportation solutions. And rollout isn't a pun intended, but maybe inadvertently one. But I think that figuring out how to do in a structured way and in a way that, you know, really is sound from a policy perspective, how to have good conversations with the community that really honors the diversity of that community, that highlights in a granular way what are the challenges that distinct subgroups in the disability community have, and how do we get those subgroups working on and really engaging with transportation operators on the kinds of barriers that they experience. And I think one of the really hard things when we have conversations as a broad community is that the nature of the barriers that people experience are so diverse that we don't always do as good a job as we could at having those more specific conversations about, you know, if I'm a blind person, well, I am a blind person, what are the conversations that I need to have with transit operators around wayfinding at transit stations? Is very, very different than the conversation that a friend who uses a fixed frame wheelchair may need to have with a service like Lyft, for example. So I think that trying to honor both, the community as a whole and also to create space for those more specific conversations is a huge challenge for us as we move forward.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Sam. That's great ideas, and it really resonates with the stuff that I've experienced. So Chris, what would you say the big challenge for you in this area coming forward?
So I think there are several challenges in this realm. So first of all, more immediately under COVID, it's quite difficult to reach the members of the community, especially those that are isolated, be it seniors or customers with disability. The more vulnerable groups, they have at the moment, I think it's right to do so, is to stay home as much as they can. But at the same time, it also disconnects the communication a little bit, which create a little bit of a vacuum that we are unable to get feedback from. And I definitely agree with the point, nothing about us without us. It's that we need to continue to have that conversation. The other part of it is, and as Sam just I think one of Sam's main point is, there is no single answer that can solve all the problems. And frankly, technology might not necessarily be there. As we have more education, there is more categories, and they discover different disabilities or different needs. But unfortunately, there might not be a technology that necessarily be able to help them right away, or at least in the transportation industry. The other part is, I think, is the awareness. And I'm not just talking about awareness for the operator, or not just the awareness for the companies or for the members in the community, but it's the general public, everyone. It's rather they have the will and the power to learn about different customers with, or different people with different abilities, and have an understanding there are different needs, and just because they don't look a certain way doesn't mean that they don't need the support.
Thanks very much. That's great. John, if you could talk about the biggest challenge you see on the horizon for your in addressing this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly echo what all my other colleagues have mentioned. I think there's certainly economic pressures on transit agencies, municipalities, especially now, which are heightened with COVID and things like that. So it's really about, how to provide an equitable, accessible, transportation ecosystem to its communities and citizens. So, I think it's, the engagement piece is quite critical, and that I think probably more of that needs to be happening with the community at large. But really just I think it's really thinking about how to reimagine what we typically do in and around municipalities with transportation. Again, I just keep pointing back to the advancement in the industry with vehicle types and things like that. I think in many cases we see large format buses traveling around empty, which is costing everyone a lot of dollars, and how to better redeploy those resources that's a bit more zeroed in and targeted in the communities and for those citizens that really require the services. So I think that's a challenge, is how do we reimagine something that's been around for 100 years, and I think it's happening, but certainly I think there's lots of opportunity to continue that advancement.
Thanks very much, John. Sophia.
Yeah, I mean, I also echo everyone else's answer. I think this is a very complex policy issue and just an issue that affects so many people. And it is really difficult to find, a one size fits all solution where everyone feels like it's going to help them and that they feel like they have equitable access. I think too for Lyft, the challenge is, of course, we operate in so many different types of localized communities. And so just because, something works for us in Toronto or something works for us in California or Boston does not necessarily mean that that exact same type of model is going to translate and work well here in British Columbia. And so I think that's going to be one of the challenges for us as a North American wide, company, really continuing to have those very hyper local conversations and really understanding that, just because something worked somewhere else does not mean that's the model we should be bringing here. We need to really understand the nuances of this market, the nuances of the needs of the community, and figure out how to really make it, as I mentioned, kind of a more made in BC type of solution. So I think that's going to be one of our biggest challenges going forward.
Thanks, Sophia. And Terry, I'll let you end up with the last comment from the panelists from the prepared questions.
Yeah, well, one of the problems going forward I see is affordability of taxi rides and ride hailing rides, because of the people with disabilities or with wheelchairs rely on taxi savers quite a bit, and we put up a tremendous battle 3-4 years ago to retain the taxi savers. And I can tell that some people don't know what taxi savers are. They're you buy $40 worth of taxi savers and you get $80 worth of transportation. So that I can't really, I doubt if the ride hailing businesses are using them at this point. But that's, so affordability of those kind of rides going forward, so I see it as a problem.
Okay, thanks very much, Terry. I think that those questions that you sort of had there lead really nicely into sort of questions for the panelists. So we have Lauren, who's helping us moderate questions from the Q&A. And there's so many good questions. So maybe I'm going to let Lauren take it away, and I'll get her to read some questions, one question at a time, and we'll try and direct it at people. And we'll try and get to as many questions as we can. And if there's any questions left over, we will just share them with the panelists and might get them to respond to them, and we can sort of send that out after this event is over.
Hi, Ben. Thank you so much. I'm going to start by reading. First of all, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, okay. I was having some issues with my mic earlier. I just wanted to make sure. I will start by reading from the questions and answers box here, and then I will look to see if anyone has their hand up and call on them to verbally ask their question. I have tried to follow along with the chat. Some people posted in there, so I will address those after that, if possible. Okay, so the first question is from Danielle. She stated that Lyft seems to be a player in this conference. Can they team up with GM in Ontario, as that will make more electric accessible vehicles that can also service rural areas?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, yes, we operate in Toronto and in Ottawa and Ontario, and that's an interesting comment about partnering with someone like General Motors. I think, one of the things that we're really trying to determine as we continue, establishing our footprint in Ontario and BC is, what type of third-party partnerships are going to be most useful to us as we're trying to figure out not only accessibility in the cities, but as we expand into more rural areas, how that could work. And so really appreciate comments like yours on, kind of proposing what type of partnerships could maybe work. So that's definitely something, I can take to our operations team and would love to kind of hear their thoughts on that. But thank you very much for that piece of feedback. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Okay, so Marco is the next commenter. He asked, why are accessibility features not rolled out by default when launching in a new location, particularly in the Lower Mainland, as it's already determined that there is a need for more accessible and assistance trained drivers on the road?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think usually how we decide to do it is we launch into a market. We kind of understand, what are the demands of the market? What are the demographics of the market? What are the different trends that we're seeing in the market? So we can really use that and augment on it and really deliver then a service that makes sense for the region. So that's kind of why we don't launch with a lot of these very specific types of modes and services. The other thing that kind of happened right after we launched is COVID, and that really kind of undermined a lot of the trends that we would usually see in a market that didn't have something like COVID happen. And so I think that also has led to a little bit, not of a delay, but just for us waiting for the market to mature a little bit again, and for us to get to see a little bit more clearly what those transportation trends are. But usually we like to launch in a market, see those trends, and then take those trends back to really figure out how we're going to launch these specific types of services in a way that makes sense.
Thank you. And there's another question from Jane. She's wondering how the AMP device helps deaf people.
For sure. So the AMP device, I don't know if anyone has ever seen it, but it's kind of this like pink purple color that's put at the front of the dashboard in the car, and it says Lyft on it. And so how it kind of helps is, if you're standing outside on the curb and you're getting a bunch of pings on your phone that you can't see, you can see then a vehicle approaching with this really, really bright colored AMP that is really, really easy for you to see. And so that's just a way for us to make it a lot easier for people that may not necessarily be hearing, their cell phone going off. They can at least see that a vehicle with that really bright AMP is approaching, and they'll then know that, that is their vehicle that is on its way.
Okay, and then we had a concern from Heather. She recently discovered that Handy Dart cannot take skis. There's no public transportation to ski anywhere in my community, and I can't afford a taxi each time I go, nor can I afford the rent each time. And she's just wondering if there's any, solutions to this. It was more of a statement, the way it was phrased, but I'm assuming she would like an answer on that.
I guess the question is not asked in Lower Mainland because I don't think we get that much snow to begin with to be able to ski that much in Lower Mainland. Now, with that said, I think part of the concern might be that at least in Lower Mainland, for customers on Handy Dart, so maybe just to clarify that a little bit, Handy Dart service is for customers that cannot ride public transit on their own safely. So it's for customers that might need some support or might have difficulty with traveling on their own. But with that said, Handy Dart customers are expected to be able to carry their own items. So they will, so I guess in case of skis, they would need to be able to secure the skis to bring it from where they are to the vehicle, load them onto the vehicle, and they would need to be able to strap them down safely. Now, I think doing that on a regular vehicle is already a challenge, not to mention bringing it on a share ride vehicle like a Handy Dart. So perhaps that's one of the reasons why you might be experiencing that challenge in your community. On the other hand, I strongly encourage you to contact, if you live in Lower Mainland, please contact us, and I'm sure some of my colleagues will be able to help you and see what solutions are there to help you on your trip.
Thank you. I believe it sounds like she doesn't, because her next question was, I live in a community with lots of snow, but also lots of freeze-thaw conditions in the winter, and consequently lots of ice. The city doesn't think that clearing the curb is important. Do you have any recommendations on how to convenience them to do so? This would enable a lot of us to get to the closest bus stop. I'm not sure.
That should be convince them to do so.
Yeah, who would be best at that? Sorry about that.
I don't think we have anyone from the city specifically or from the municipality specifically.
But maybe Terry and Sam would have lived experience on some of the recommendations they have regarding situation like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it deserves a couple of different kinds of responses. One is it really highlights the different kinds of attention that need to be paid to barriers to transportation in a more urban center, like Metro Vancouver, like Victoria. And then, we know from a geographic perspective, there are so many communities across the province where the transportation infrastructure is just so fundamentally different. And, I think, of course, can't speak on behalf of any given local government, but it's always been my experience, and some of this I'm drawing more from my time doing advocacy work and in the nonprofit sector, that, the first step is to figure out how to frame the question around the barrier you're experiencing in such a way that you're seeking to develop and build partnerships with the people who have the capacity to address the challenge, right? So I really do think, whether or not we're talking about an urban community or a rural one, most people care about promoting accessibility and inclusivity. And I think, so often the place to start is, here's a challenge, and what can we do to work together to figure out how to address it? And, I'm sure that there's many very able advocates on the call who understand that, and that there's room for more forceful kinds of encouragement. But that, I'd really encourage us all to start from a place of assuming that we live within communities that want to support us and want to figure out creative solutions. And that, so often it's that relationship building process within our communities that I think is really the first and most critical key to finding solutions.
Sam, that's a great point. Yeah, I think it's easy for people to get sort of bitter and sort of angry, but I really like your approach there. I just keep thinking about how the city issued fines for not shoveling your snow like 6 months after the snow had gone away. But obviously that's a problem. So with your approach, it would be great to try and talk to them and figure out ways that they could make those fines happen a little closer to the actual event. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And Terry, did you want to throw something in there?
Oh, I have that problem. I live a block off of West Broadway, and just getting to the bus stops a few times last winter were very, very trying. But I guess, Sam's right. It's networking, small and large, both approaching from the city and also approaching from your network of neighbors. And, if it takes a letter in their mailbox, maybe to ask them to phone the city for snow angels. There are people who come out to shovel if you're too elderly to shovel. So, yeah.
Thanks so much. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Terry.
Well, usually the bottom-up approach is a good way to do things. So Sam's a wise man.
And then it was interesting. Kim had a comment in the chat. She just says, I call bylaws and ask that my street be prioritized for snow blowing. She lives in Surrey. So that's her comment. So thank you.
Thank you all. Those were great ideas. And Sonia asked next, are there Lyft wheelchair accessible rides in the interior, specifically the Okanagan region?
We actually, we don't operate right now outside of Metro Vancouver. So we just operate within the 23 other municipalities. And within Metro Vancouver, where we actually operate, as I mentioned, we still don't have the access mode feature. So definitely something that we're working really hard on to figure out a strategy on how to roll that out over the next little while. And if we do launch outside of Metro Vancouver, like in the Okanagan, again, that would be something that we would look into with the local community as to how to best approach that.
Okay, and then Jacques was next. He's wondering how many reps from the transportation industry actually have a panel of reps from the disability community through which they discuss accessibility issues. There's nothing about us without us, he said.
So I guess I'll kind of go to that first, and in a way that's part of what I was addressing earlier. TransLink do have user advisory committee and also the HandyDart user advisory committee. So they consist of representatives who have lived experience, but also from community groups that support customers with disability as well. But I think I also want to add one more point to that, is that well, even if you are not on a board like that, you can definitely let us know anytime that if you have a comment or you have a suggestion about how we can make your experience improve in Lower Mainland or in transit by contacting us. We have several venues, such as the customer information line. So you could call 604-953-3333. That's also the same number you call if you have questions about how to use the transit system. That's another way to do that. Also, we do have comments section online, and some people even go to our Twitter and Facebook and let us know their issues or any suggestions like that. So and we do look at those, and it might not be necessarily done within the next week or so, but comments like that, they do get passed up to pass along to people that needs to see them, and they do we do try to address them as much as we can.
Thanks very much, Chris. Could you put those numbers in the chat box for people? That'd be really sweet. Thank you. Did anyone else have any comments about that nothing for without us comment?
I just agree with it is all. And thank you for it.
Yeah, and I mean, I can jump in as well, and just reiterate that we do hire people with disabilities to work at Lyft to really kind of be our accessibility specialists. So that's something that we take incredibly seriously. And when we are figuring out how to make our platform more inclusive in different cities and jurisdictions across North America, the most important thing is talking with folks like you and really engaging with local disability advocacy organizations and understanding their point of view. So definitely agree with you. And it's something that we take very seriously at Lyft.
Terry, did you want to add anything?
Not that I can think of, no. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. Great, so yeah, we're gonna keep going there, Lauren.
Thank you. Dali asked, who here is equipped to answer the questions about regular bus service? A lot of disabled people use regular transit. Most of the temporarily disabled people do as well. I don't see anybody from TransLink. I believe you might have touched on this earlier. I'm not sure if you have anything to add.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm from TransLink. So we are here, and mostly today is to hear comments about what are some of the concerns and how we can improve. And we do participate in panels as much as we can when we get invites and things like that. Unfortunately, sometimes there are so many conversations going on, we aren't necessarily aware of all of them. But if anyone ever have any panels or any discussion or would like a meeting, please by all means contact us at TransLink, and I'm sure we'll be happy to have that conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Ben.
Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you, Chris. And I think this segues nicely into the next question.
Perfect. Okay. Jacques, I had a follow-up question. or not necessarily follow-up, it's more of a new one. TransLink had previously committed to the installation of washrooms in the new Millennium Line extension stations. However, TransLink has now pulled back from this commitment and says they will supply only rough-ins for washrooms. How much weight does TransLink attach to the joint requests from reps from disability communities and seniors and parents with children, etc., who need washrooms in order to use transit?
Yeah, I think that topic has been in discussion for, I think, Terry, you could correct me, I think for years now. I know before I even worked for TransLink, when I was working in another field, but I had some involvement in this conversation, and that was over 10 years ago. Now, with that said, there were some good news that TransLink was, I believe at the end of last year, the board adopted a plan to look into the future of building washrooms facilities at major hubs. But there was no concrete plan per se at that moment to deliver that. Or when that will be able to be delivered, but we continue to have that conversation. But I think it's actually, I really like how the survey earlier included the washroom into the built environment on that conversation. I think it for us in North America or Lower Mainland, there's always a little bit of different experience, especially if you came from another country before. So for example, me, myself, and I can only speak to my own experience, is I was from Hong Kong, and I always have family and friends that tell me how great the MTR system is in Hong Kong. But one thing I did notice that, like in such a developed system like MTR, they don't have washroom inside the stations. But what they do have is they have malls built on top of MTR stations, partly because they are underground, so they can do that. And inside the mall, there's McDonald's, there's Starbucks, there's shops that people can utilize the washroom. And in Asia, you could just walk in. You don't have to feel obligated to buy something. I think it's a little bit of that culture because in North America, we have been so car-centric in comparison. It was kind of expected that, oh, you go to the washroom before you leave, you jump into your car, and then when you get there, if you need to go to the bathroom, by all means do that. But as we transition into public transit and more use of public transit, washroom is not necessarily readily available at the moment. Now, with that said, there are discussions and there are plans to look into that. So that's encouraging. But at the moment, that's where we're at. On the other hand, for seniors and customers with disability, there is currently a short-term solution that, for example, if you do need to use the facilities urgently, you can actually contact one of our SkyTrain attendants. If the staff washroom is in locations where it's not in the restricted area, they do have the ability to allow customers with disabilities and seniors to utilize those facilities.
Thank you.
So, Chris, just maybe a follow-up question for Jacques. He was asking about advocacy, and so I was just curious: what would you suggest to this group to try and advocate for better washrooms in these places?
Well, I think that topic do come up at the Users Advisory Committee. So members of the User Advisory Committee, they do bring that up. And of course, the plans that they are working on right now by staff, they do take that to the User Advisory Committee for their comment. So this is definitely ongoing discussion, but it's such a large system, and it's in a way it's kind of like the elevator as well, because we have stations that were built in different eras where codes and requirements were are very different. Unfortunately, there is no real way that we can update every single SkyTrain station at the same time, because then the system just wouldn't work. So I think a part of it is as we build and upgrade some of the older stations, and as we add new stations, as we build the system and expand the system, we will see more of these infrastructure in place.
Thanks, Chris. Lauren, go ahead.
Thank you. Sonia had another question. In terms of ride-sharing options for wheelchair users, has Lyft considered hiring drivers who are wheelchair users themselves, being that they would have vehicles to accommodate people with wheelchairs?
Yeah, that's actually a really great idea. And it's something that, as we brainstorm internally, that has also definitely come up. But it's definitely a suggestion that I'm going to reiterate with the team as we kind of work to build out our approach for Metro Vancouver. So yeah, really great idea. I appreciate you bringing that up.
The one problem with that will be tying down your passengers, but not always the case.
Thank you. So Al has a comment and question next. I'm a wheelchair user and have been left on Granville Street until the cab shift exchange at 5 a.m. twice. Cab shift being refused pickup by many taxis because they want to fill their cabs with people who don't use wheelchairs. One cab pulled over to pick up my attendant and then saw me and pulled away. This situation is well known. Has it ever been addressed or looked at?
Yeah, does anyone on the panel have any thoughts in that regard, or is it just an item we should table that maybe Shireen could push forward a bit?
They do have the "if you've been passed up" phone number written on the side of the taxis, but that doesn't help you, I guess, at 3 a.m.
Yeah, I think at this point, I'd probably extend our condolences from the group, because that sounds like a terrible situation. And it would be great to try and figure out a way to stop it from happening. So maybe this is one of the items we'll bring forward with Shireen to think about as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I have an anonymous commenter here who said, as someone who addresses the impact of ride-hailing apps like Lyft on public transit, and then she put a question mark at the end there, and then she said, or he, some studies I have read have found that the introduction of ride-hailing apps have led to a decline in both the use and funding of public transit. I rely on public transit, and I'm very worried that the more that Lyft enters the market, the more I'll see my public transit services deteriorate. That would have a huge negative impact on me.
Yeah, so maybe I'll jump in. Really appreciate the honesty of your comment, and I sympathize with your concern. I can speak on behalf of Lyft. I can't speak on behalf of all of Rideshare, but I know at Lyft, one of the big values that we have is that we want to be part of the transportation system. And that actually means working with transit, not displacing or replacing transit. We really want to be seen as that first and last mile solution. If there's, let's say, a transit route that's not being used enough and it's costly for the transit agency, we want to partner with that transit agency to find a solution so that people, who are reliant on that route can still find a way to get around. So, we've seen in other markets, and as I mentioned, we do this thing called the economic impact report. And we've actually seen in other markets that people who use rideshare are also more likely to use transit. So that's a really great trend, and it's something that we really take seriously. And one of the things that we actually just launched in Metro Vancouver is we have now within the app, you can actually see real-time transit information from TransLink. So the app will actually tell you, you can catch the bus in 5 minutes. If you walk this amount, you can get to the SkyTrain station, and it'll even give you all the times of when they're coming. So we're really, really trying to partner with transit agencies and just be kind of an additional option rather than replacing or displacing them. And we look forward to working more closely with TransLink in the future.
I can add, I've had the good fortune to, through engagement with some of my colleagues with government's Ministry of Municipal Affairs, to have some discussions with colleagues at TransLink and public transit agencies who are thinking about, what's the future of public transit in the Metro Vancouver area and more broadly. It's struck me that there's been pretty uniformly an acknowledgement of how important public transit is for the future of those areas. And there's been nothing in just any discussions that I've had that would suggest that there's any sense that public transit will become less important as we move into the future, particularly thinking about the imperative to, mitigate things like carbon emissions. And so I hope that provides a measure of confidence to the commenter.
Thank you. Amy had a comment next, and I think she wants people to build off of that with some feedback. She said she had an experience with SkyTrain timing recently. I had no idea what happened being deaf. A person came on the SkyTrain and spoke verbally, and then people got off, but I had no idea what happened, so I stayed put and tried to wave her down to get her to type out on my iPad. She had already marched off in the opposite direction, so she just stayed put. Eventually, the lady saw her, came back and typed out what was going on, but she's deaf, so uses this iPad. She left, and someone else came and wrote down that 15 trains timed out, so she had to get off the train. And then she said communication could be better for things like this, so I think she's just a little bit obviously concerned about that incident and wants some feedback on that.
Yep. So I actually really appreciate this comment from Amy. One of the things that we have been hearing from the community as I perform travel training in the community is that invisible disability a lot of times do get missed by, it's not just the transit authority, but also by the community overall because of lack of awareness. With that said, I think one of the things that we are trying to do in the Access Transit program is that we are trying to raise the awareness, as I said earlier, not only for the employees, but also for the general passenger community, but also the general community. Is to raise the awareness that there are customers with invisible disability or that might have different needs, and we might need to look at different ways to support that. So one of the things that we did was we created travel training videos for customers, but as we do that, we work with the training department from Coast Mountain, also from SkyTrain and CBus, and we talk to them about some of the concerns and some of the possible gaps that we have. And it's interesting that since then, different training departments have been calling or emailing me, and we are talking about how to integrate some of those information into the frontline staff training curriculum. So of course, with that said, we don't have all the information, but we are looking, definitely having that conversation to include some of those information into the training curriculum.
Thank you. Michelle wrote out some questions for Sonia. So I'll just shoot them off here and then because they're all kind of interrelated. How does Lyft compare with other rideshare platforms? Currently, which areas of the Lower Mainland do you serve? What is the criteria to become a Lyft driver? in terms of making Lyft vehicles more accessible, have you considered offering an incentive to drivers willing to retrofit their vehicles to accommodate people with mobility issues or wheelchairs? I think a barrier to taxis is affordability. How do Lyft prices compare?
Okay, I'll try and go through all the questions. And Lauren, if I forget to answer one, just please let me know. So I think the other one was how we compare with other rideshare platforms. So I can't speak to other rideshare platforms, but what I can tell you is that at Lyft, we have a really strong focus on the local community. And over the last year, we've worked really hard to build a lot of different local partners. And we've been providing actually access to free ride credit to nonprofits across the region, especially during COVID, where transportation became just so essential for so many of these organizations. So that's who we are at Lyft, and that's something that we hold very, very dear to ourselves, and something that we really want to make sure that we're doing well as we continue to operate in Metro Vancouver. Where do we operate right now? Just in Metro Vancouver. So we don't even operate yet in like Abbotsford or Chilliwack or Squamish or Whistler. We're really just in the 23 municipalities of Metro Vancouver. And then criteria to become a Lyft driver. So in British Columbia, a class 4 license is required. There are background checks that are carried out among other requirements. You need to have a vehicle of a certain age. You need to go through a vulnerable sector check. And there's a bunch of other things that you'll have to go through. And so if you really want to learn more, please do visit lyft.com/driver if you're kind of interested in what it would take to become a driver here in British Columbia. And then I think the other one was, do we offer an incentive to drivers willing to retrofit their vehicles? Was that? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So again, that's a really great recommendation. Thank you for providing it. This is something that I definitely will, we've been thinking about this as well, because we're trying to figure out, like, how can we get more drivers on the road that have these types of vehicles? So again, I'm going to make a note of this for conversations with the local team as we continue kind of building out what our program will look like in the coming months, in the coming year. And then what was the last question?
She said a barrier to taxis is the affordability, and she wants to know how Lyft prices compare.
Yeah, for sure. So I can't speak to taxi fares, but I can share that a feature people do appreciate with Lyft is the upfront pricing. So before you even book your ride and accept, the ride with the driver, you can see upfront exactly what your trip will cost. That cost will not change for the duration of the ride. So that is the cost that you will be paying. It will not change. And the other thing I mentioned in the presentation is our rates don't change based on the service that you require. So if you have a disability and you need a little bit more help, or you have a service dog, or you have a foldable wheelchair or walker and need assistance, the rates do not change. It's even and equitable across the board.
Thank you. So Marco posted a question that it says, Chris, and then what is the logistics for the potential for a raised and widened cement platform on disabled bus stops? And why are certain bus stops not marked with being accessible? And then there's a comma, and progress on washrooms at SkyTrain stations, ?
Okay, so we address a little bit of the washroom question, but I really like the one about the concrete and the sidewalk question. I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding of the jurisdiction and the almighty power of Translink, that I would like to call it. While we can control the accessibility of the SkyTrain station, the bus vehicles we purchase and things like that. Unfortunately, with a lot of our bus stops, because they are located on sidewalks, and sidewalks is owned by the local municipalities, we don't have a full say on whether we can make changes to the bus stop. Now, with that said, we do take input from the community, and that's kind of going back to the phone number or the website I shared earlier, is that you can contact us with suggestion, but you could also make the same information and forward them to your local municipalities to let them know that certain bus stops should be improved. Now, as we mentioned earlier, most, if not all of our vehicles, and to my understanding is all of them, all of our transit vehicles are accessible. unfortunately, not all bus stops are because of precisely that factor. It could be because they are on a hill, they are slanted, it's not safe for a ramp to deploy. With that said, we do work with municipalities. TransLink actually provide a certain amount of funding every year to the different municipalities so that they can actually propose for projects to improve pedestrian infrastructure. That will help also improve some of the bus stops and things like that. But I think a lot of this conversation, like I said earlier, is working with our partners of the municipal government.
Thank you. David was wondering if the Accessible Canada Act can assist with the promotion of inclusion and accessibility for transportation between the federal and provincial government.
Hey, that's one that I actually might be able to say a little bit about. As the question implies, the Accessible Canada Act is the federal accessibility legislation that was enacted in the summer of 2019. And it provides the capacity to regulate on accessibility issues within areas of federal jurisdiction. And unfortunately, while there are some types of transport, aspects of ferries, for example, as well as interprovincial travel that do fall within the scope of federal jurisdiction, you'll find that there are other types of transport and perhaps the kinds of transport that people more routinely use on a day-to-day basis, where the federal government would not have the capacity to regulate just because it's not within that jurisdictional space. So it's one of the reasons that the province has initiated the development of provincial accessibility legislation, because we really need that scheme in place at both levels of government to create more capacity to do good work in that area. And to, I want to be really clear, and this is aligned with the Accessible Canada Act and the legislation that we've seen in other jurisdictions. Just because the legislation is in place, that'll be an important step forward in allowing us to start that work of asking about, what's our policy for different areas, including transportation. But it'll really be in the subsequent work of implementing the legislation after it's introduced, hopefully this year, and the expectation is this springtime. But it's really that long tail to implementing the legislation in partnership with people with disabilities and in partnership with operators across a variety of sectors. That'll really be where I think the provincial legislation will add value.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sam. Oh, I just want to mention, so Sam has to run off. So I just want to really thank him for his contributions today. It was really, really appreciated the things you had to say.
Ben, thank you very much for facilitating today, and a huge thank you to the Disability Foundation for inviting me to participate, and for everyone for joining. I apologize for needing to run a few minutes early, but thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, I'll just carry on here because we have a lot of questions. I'm trying to go through them fast as I can. Michelle wants to know where you can buy taxi savers and if anyone can buy them.
Okay, thank you for that question. So Taxi Savers is part of the Handy Card program, not the Handy Dart program. So for those customers that don't, or participants that don't know, there are actually two programs offered by TransLink. So there's the Handy Dart program, which is the big yellow bus that everybody sees on the road, and they do, as mentioned earlier, transport passengers that have difficulties with using conventional transit on their own. The handy card program is for customers with a disability, with a permanent disability that resides in Lower Mainland and only available for customers that resides in Lower Mainland that have difficulty with using conventional transit on their own. So what handy card allows customers to do is for customers that is older of legal age, but under 65, they can actually use handy card as a proof of ID so that they could use what they call concession fares, which is a lower fare to use conventional transit system. They are also have the ability to have an attendant with them, so somebody to board a transit vehicle with them and to support that customer. And they together they only pay one transit fare, which is the prime card holder. And on top of that is the taxi savers. So anyone that is enrolled in the handy card program, they can actually purchase taxi savers. And as Terry mentioned earlier, it's kind of like a 2-for-1. So you pay a certain amount, and there is a limit each month. You could purchase a certain amount, and you get double the value, and that allows you to use it on taxis. Now, with that said, I think it's important to note that taxi is quite an expensive option. It's not designed for customers to use it on a daily basis to go everywhere. I think it's more as a maybe perhaps as Sophia said, for first mile, last mile options, or when there is no other options available. So it's more as a supplement of using the different modes of transportation, which include the conventional transit system, but also the handy dart.
Thank you. I'll just move it along here. And Marco commented, Chris, can you speak to TransLink's temporary procedures for wheelchair passengers and whether or not this policy has been removed? For reference, it's stated, BC bus operators will not be able to assist our wheelchair customers with being strapped in a front-facing position on our conventional buses. Those with mobility devices on buses that have a rear-facing accessible seat will be able to park in the designated area themselves and secure their device. This is the case for most buses. For buses that do not have this area, such as highway coaches and community shuttles, customers with mobility devices will need to travel with someone who can assist them or find an alternative mode of travel.
Well, thank you for that question, and it is true. Now, well, let's we'll go through what normally in non-COVID world happens. All our buses do equip with, as we mentioned earlier, they are accessible, so they do usually have spots where a mobility aid can be boarded and be parked during a travel. Before COVID, on most conventional transit vehicles, like the big buses, they come with two mobility aids parking spots. One is forward facing on the right-hand side towards the sidewalks. One is the rear facing, which is just behind the driver. The difference between the two is, other than the fact that they are looking at different direction, is with the rear facing spots, there is no requirement to secure the mobility aid, because in an emergency brake situation, they actually only leans backward towards the cushion. So some customers might have noticed that there's this big cushion behind the drivers, which a lot of times, if nobody is in those spots, someone would lean towards it, and being a comfortable support, while that's not really designed for that purpose. And the forward-facing spots, which is on the right-hand side, does require securement, because in an emergency situation, it might tip over. Now, with COVID, because of the sheer difficulty that you need to have social distance, because there are customers that won't feel comfortable, or transit operators that might not feel comfortable, because when they have to secure a mobility device, depending on the type of mobility device, some of them, they have to get really close to the passenger. So at the moment, we still haven't figured out a way to avoid that situation. So for the time being, customers that travel on mobility aid, if they are traveling on their own, they can only use the rear-facing spots. So that has not changed to this date, but I understand that they continue to have that conversation right now to see what can be done about it.
Thanks. Jim had a question saying, while in Toronto, I used Uber for transit around the city. They seem to have a tremendous number of wheelchair accessible vans. Seems to me some are privately owned and sent out at the same weight taxis are, with various drivers. Would Lyft be willing to accommodate something like this as well?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at a lot of different options right now in terms of what could work best in BC. That's a model that we do in some markets. As I mentioned, what we do in Toronto is we partner with Pacific Western Transportation, and they provide us with the fleet so that we can, and the drivers, so that we can offer that service. But yeah, it's something that we really got to look at all the different options, and that's an option that we will, be discussing and seeing if that would work well in this market.
Thank you. Jane said she drives for Lyft as a retired healthcare person. She has a vehicle for power chairs, and it's a Honda Odyssey. I have training, a license, and was told that it's just worded a little, that one vehicle doesn't make a fleet of disability vehicles. People wait an hour for Handy Dart taxi, sometimes 2 hours. I am available now and am denied. For me, I can take people, and I work hard as a disability advocate.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this, Jane. Really appreciate your comment. As I mentioned, I think we're still really trying to figure out what we're doing here. And I think as we continue to build our program, we will take what you said into consideration. And this is something that I'm absolutely going to flag to our operations team, because it's something that they should know. So do appreciate you kind of, sharing this and letting me know that this happened to you.
Thanks. I'm just trying to fly through a few here because we're almost running out of time. Jim said, I really found having a wheelchair taxi type service helps for that last mile. Getting to transit and from transit from a stop is difficult, especially when the weather goes bad, I guess.
I don't think there's a question.
Yeah, I think that was just a comment. Okay.
Yeah.
And then Caitlin said, one of the problems around the supply of wheelchair accessibility is vans. It's the cost associated with insurance and making updates to the vehicle that makes it hard. How would Lyft support the drivers and create an environment that promotes the growth of wheelchair accessible vehicles in their fleet?
Yeah, that's a great question. Every market that we operate in is so different, as I kind of was mentioning, right? Like you can't have just one kind of fits all solution. So we're really looking at combining learnings from all of those different markets with the conditions in BC, because the conditions in BC are unique, right? To really create the best path forward. So for example, in a number of markets, we partner, as I mentioned, with third parties to support those looking to get a ride with a wheelchair accessible vehicle. So in that case, we aren't building a wheelchair accessible fleet, we're more partnering with an external provider. However, like I said, we will be taking today's feedback into consideration as we build out what a Made in BC program could look like.
I'm not sure about how we're doing on time. I think this is kind of the end.
Yeah, maybe a couple more questions.
A couple more?
Yeah, maybe we could maybe just one more. But let's just skip to some ones that are, the next one looks good, like anonymous, I guess. I'm not sure what an IBEA was, but we can ask.
Okay, yeah, same. I wasn't too sure either. So can the use of IBEA cons that transmit information be used at transit stops, central hubs, and apps for improved navigation for persons with visual impairments?
So, well, thanks for that. I do believe that that's another issue that the user advisory committee was looking into, and they did recently have some what they call the tactile bus stop signs they were introducing that, and they first introduced those to some of the rapid bus stops in Vancouver, and they are gradually being introduced to different locations throughout Lower Mainland. Now, with that said, no, this conversation do come up with when we discuss with CNIB every now and then, and to our understanding is that no, CNIB is working with the community on a program to supply some of the customers with cell phones. So a lot of the cell phone abilities do support customers with sight loss, and that and so there are programs or tools available, and of course through the TransLink website, and if you have a cell phone, you would be able to get those information, and for customer with sight loss, they would be able to get those information by using the tools that they use to read information on their own cell phone. Beyond that, I think that's always a conversation we can have, is what kind of tools is out there. So if the participant that typed this in, could you please let us know about the IBEA cons, and we can definitely have that conversation to see where to begin and how we can look into implementing similar or exactly that tool.
Thanks very much, Chris. Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap the questions now. We've got about 2 minutes left, and I'm going to finish on time. So I just want to thank all the panelists, first and foremost, for being so willing to sit here and answer questions and listen and receive feedback from people. So thank you so much, Sophia and Chris and John and Terry and Sam, who's had to leave. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And I also want to thank all the people who took time from their day to come here and listen and contribute their questions. Just moving forward, we will be sending out information about the event. There was a YouTube video that's been done, and then we'll send out the survey findings to people who've registered. And also we will, when you do end, there's a survey that was going to pop up in your browser. And it takes less than 5 minutes to complete. So if you're able to take the time to do that, we would really appreciate it. And as I mentioned, there's going to be a summary report, and summary of the survey findings will be presented. And I'm also hoping that the members of the panel might be able to look at some of the questions that remain, and if they can address them, to send those answers to, well, Ruby and Shireen at the Disability Foundation, so that they could add those to the report from the meeting. Okay, so there's going to be a follow-up presentation on ConnecTra Together on December 8th at noon. And Chris Chen is going to be there, so talking about how to utilize TransLink's diverse and accessible public transit system in Metro Vancouver. And you can register at connectra.org under the calendar of events. And this link is being posted in the chat. So thank you so much again for attending. And I'm going to call it quits. I have like 12 seconds left. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Hey, Shireen. What happens now? We never